Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Okay. Let's go. History March. I'm up. I'm awake. I'm not tired. Sort of. I have coffee. We're good. Original link to the video, top of the description. Below that, link to the Discord. Click on that. Send right over there. Would love to have you. Let's go. Second Battle of Nola, 215 BC. Hannibal, Part 19. Second Punic War. Hannibal, one of my favorite, if not my favorite, leaders, that military commanders that I've learned about. I think he has not many weaknesses in terms of maybe not having smarts, like military smarts, or not being aggressive when you should be, and not holding back when you shouldn't be so aggressive, and knowing when to use diplomatic means rather than going for battle at all. And it just seems like, from what I've learned about him so far, which is basically everything I know about Hannibal is just from watching these videos, but that's definitely, I get a feeling that he's just extremely, extremely capable, and doesn't have weaknesses that some others do. Let's go.
It's mid-August 215 BC. For over a month now, Carthaginian troops plundered the countryside around the city of Nola. Joined by Hanno's army from Brutium, Hannibal made a point of ravaging the land right in front of the gates, where the inhabitants could see their fields and property burning. Undermining Roman authority in this way, he hoped, would drive Marcellus to meet him in open battle, or suffer the embarrassment for refusing to fight. Amazingly, the political elite of Nola still preferred to man the walls instead of confronting the enemy. But Marcellus ordered the legions to deploy. Aware that support for Hannibal among residents of Nola was strong, he understood that the continuation of political wrangling could turn this situation into a proper debacle, with the whole city rebelling against Rome. Worse, if Hannibal was allowed time to build siege towers, as he had done at Cumae in 215, the Roman army could end up being trapped between the Carthaginian assault on the walls and fighting the rebels in the streets. Action needed to be taken now. Once the last of his men exited, Marcellus ordered the gates shut and rushed to meet Hannibal head-on. Much like in the first encounter, he forewent arraying the troops in battle formation for the sake of speed. And again, the shock of the Roman attack initially threw the Carthaginians off balance.
I feel like this is really rare for History March videos, or any of the ones, of getting so quickly into the battling scenarios here. All right.
During the next half hour, more troops from each side joined the battle. However, a sudden rainstorm then quickly turned the ground into mud. Hannibal's veterans gained the upper hand in these conditions, inflicting losses and forcing back the Roman line. But the continued fighting wore down both sides, forcing the men to withdraw as night was fast approaching. The torrential rain kept the two armies in their camps for another 2 days. But once the third day dawned, the weather cleared and the ground hardened. Marcellus surprised Hannibal by deploying his troops in front of the walls yet again. To both Hannibal and the citizens of Nola, the message was clear: Rome would not back down. This time, it was Hannibal's turn to accept the challenge. Marcellus impressed upon the men that they fought hard to stop Hannibal once, fight hard today, and they reap the spoils of victory once again. No quarter was given by either side. The experienced Carthaginians wanted to reaffirm their supremacy, while the Romans were eager to prove themselves against Hannibal. The vicious fighting lasted for much of the afternoon. Fatigue.
For being so fearful of being surrounded on two sides because people in Nola don't like you, they don't seem to be doing much.
Kicked in for much of the afternoon. Fatigue kicked in. Thousands fell, some cut down, others crushed in the mass of soldiers. Having the walls behind him protected Marcellus's rear, preventing Hannibal from utilizing his mobile cavalry to strike the Roman flanks. As the battle of attrition wore on, the Romans persisted and wore down the Carthaginians. With the night again looming, Hannibal backed off. Marcellus had again stood toe-to-toe against the Carthaginian general. The next day, both commanders agreed to a temporary truce to allow each side to collect and bury their dead. Nola remained in Roman hands.
Jeez, that's not a... They don't usually start the episodes like that. And it's crazy what I'm sure just insane fatigue can do in terms of just being like, all right, let's take a break. I know we've been killing each other, but it's always cool to see that sort of kind of agreed upon rules, and even in crazy battles.
By September 215 BC, with 20,000 troops under the command of Hanno the Elder and another 40,000 troops commanded by Hannibal, the Carthaginians faced up to 100,000 Roman troops in Campania. Still, Hannibal was unable to force Fabius into a decisive battle. Changing tact yet again, he garrisoned key cities and marched east to winter quarters in Apulia. Hanno the Elder, meanwhile, made his way back to Bruttium to continue the subjugation of the region. With the Carthaginian army now gone from Campania, the Romans finally enjoyed some respite. Fabius ordered grain collected from nearby cities and brought to the Roman army wintering at Suessula. To lessen the supply burden on the allies, he left Marcellus only with a garrison detachment and sent the rest of the army that fought at Nola back to Rome, where they could be supplied more efficiently and get some much-needed rest. Gracchus was sent trailing after Hannibal to observe his movements from a safe distance, with strict orders to avoid a pitched battle. Back in Rome, alarm was raised in the prison buried at the foot of the Capitoline Hill. Built underground, this place was meant to be a fate worse than death. Yet, a most valuable prisoner had somehow escaped this dark, damp, and foreboding subterranean dungeon.
A movie.
Managing to disguise himself, he then made his way to Ostia on a donkey, stolen at the local market, where he boarded a small vessel and set out to meet with the king of Macedon. The mysterious man was the last surviving member of the delegation in charge of brokering the alliance between Hannibal and Philip, which was captured off the coast of Brundisium by the Romans earlier in the summer.
He seems like an old guy, too. I expected some, like, very agile, like, how'd he break out, but
transported first to Cumae and then sentenced to imprisonment by the Roman Senate. But traumatized,
oh god, I think that was okay.
Philip,
hold on.
which was captured off the coast of Brundisium by the Romans earlier in the summer. Before being transported first to Cumae and then sentenced to imprisonment by the Roman Senate. But traumatized by what he had endured during interrogation in the dungeons of Rome, the diplomat was unable to remember the exact terms of the treaty once he had reached Philip's court.
Jeez, they tortured his memory out of him?
His most remarkable escape gave the king of Macedon an early warning, and a second delegation was promptly dispatched to meet Hannibal
again
and draft the agreement anew.
Oh my god, this poor guy.
Across the sea in Iberia, the Scipio brothers wrote to the Senate detailing their successes, but stressed that they lacked the money needed to stay in the fight. They borrowed heavily from the Iberian allies to pay the wages of the troops and sailors, and insisted the Senate provide for everything else, chiefly clothing and grain, among other provisions. Without help, the Scipios claimed, the army and the province would collapse by the end of the year. Unable to
Mamma
finance
mia.
the effort in Iberia
Okay.
due to the high cost of maintaining the war against Hannibal in Italy, the Senate had no choice other than to turn to creditors. Major concessions were offered. Those who took contracts to supply the army in Iberia
Is it help, or give me this now, or you're done?
were offered. Those who took contracts to supply the army in Iberia were exempt from military service, probably along with their sons, and were to be paid first with interest, with payment guaranteed even in the event of a shipwreck or
With all the times I've heard through watching these types of history videos, whether it be Rome or not, the amount of times that just some soldiers just don't get paid and how often that's an issue, I'm surprised they're never just like, yeah, right, I don't, okay.
capture by the enemy. The state taking on the full risk of transportation was a risky proposition at best, but the Roman Senate really had no choice. The contract was taken by 57 private individuals, split into 3 companies, and the ships finally embarked for Spain. The Scipio brothers would get the supplies they needed. And, unbeknownst to the Romans, the risk they took with creditors came at the 11th hour, because around this time, Mago Barca finally embarked for Iberia with funds, supplies, and reinforcements. Whoever reached their destination first could potentially tip the balance of the war in Spain. Meanwhile, Hasdrubal the Bald's expedition to Sardinia was derailed when his fleet was blown off course, ending up in the Balearic Islands. Many of the ships had to be hauled ashore for repairs before the voyage continued. The 12,000 infantry and one...
What distances are we talking here? Like, what's the distance from here to here? 250 miles. Okay, so this side of the Mediterranean is like almost 700 at like that point, and then kind of like that, about like 900. Obviously, I'm not counting this part. Tyrrhenian Sea and Balearic Sea. I don't. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Fair. And like, for instance, what's the English? All right. Let's go back. I can't stay here too long. All right.
1,500 cavalry. Many of the ships had to be hauled ashore for repairs before the voyage continued. The 12,000 infantry and 1,500 cavalry were much welcomed reinforcements to Hampsicora's pro-Carthaginian Sardinian revolt after their defeat at Cornus a year earlier, which left them with some 3,000 men. The delay, however, allowed Titus Manlius Torquato to rebuild his army at Caralis. To his 5,000 legionaries who survived the prior clash with the Sardinians, he was able to add some 4,000 troops whose health had barely recovered from malnourishment and scurvy, though many of these men were still only fit for defense duties. Crucially, another 6,000 were on their...
Okay, guys, where are lemons native to? Where are lemons native to? Okay, so it's an old world plant. Okay. So because I know like lemons and limes are, I'm assuming limes too. It's got to be the same place. They're so similar. Yeah. Around the same area. So Southeast, Southern Asia area. Just because I know that was a cure for scurvy, but I wasn't sure if it only became one after, Age of Exploration going into the New World. Like, I'm so surprised, like, stuff like potatoes and tomatoes and beans, a lot of beans, corn, all of these things just weren't a thing in Europe, Asia, Africa until people went over there. It's crazy to me and fascinating.
Away from Rome. While these were inexperienced troops, were
gotta
still
stop. I'm
only
getting
fit for
distracted.
defense duties. Crucially, another 6,000 were on their way from Rome. While these were inexperienced troops, they were vital for shoring up Titus's ranks. Hasdrubal the Bald landed at Tharos in early autumn of 215 BC, where he was greeted by Hampsicora. The combined Carthago-Sardinian army wasted no
Guys, did bald mean something else back then? He has hair. Like, well, oh, sorry.
time
All
in
right.
The combined Carthago-Sardinian army wasted no time in marching south, aware that there was no better time to fight the Romans, many of whom were still suffering from sickness. Meanwhile, 60 Carthaginian warships and an unknown number of transports tracked the movement of the army, following the coast until they reached Caralis. Hasdrubal the Bald's intention was to fully encircle the city and starve the Romans into submission. There was no Roman fleet nearby to lift the blockade and open lines of communication, and Titus lacked the supplies to withstand a long siege. Trapped in the city, he and his army would face ruin. Left with no other choice, the Roman general marched his sickly men to meet the Carthaginians in the open. The two opponents did not immediately
This is pretty cool. This is pretty intense. Just the kind of stakes that they just set up right there.
encamping on an open plain. The two opponents did not immediately engage, encamping on an open plain west of the river Flumini Manu. Hasdrubal the Bald, while initially intending to press the Romans as soon as the opportunity presented itself, was surprised to see that Titus left the protection of the walls of Caralis, a bold move considering that a third of his army was not combat ready. The Carthaginian general wanted to reassess the situation. He sent his skirmishers to test the enemy's resolve. During the first day, the fast-moving Numidian horse pressed the Romans. But Titus's men snapped at the Carthaginians, winning several minor engagements. To Hasdrubal, this did not seem like a weary army. However, by the second day of skirmishing, the Roman general could no longer disguise the weakened state of his legions. He ordered the men to stay on the defensive and not venture forward. With so many men unfit for battle, he couldn't risk losing troops that actually were combat ready to exhaustion, injury, or death.
Yeah, I was thinking like well, the longer you wait, the less you're going to be able to have an offensive action, but maybe the best case scenario is just do not attack in any circumstance and make them come to you. Okay.
Thus, the Romans backed off. This was the sign Hasdrubal was looking for. Titus's men were weak, after all. In the morning hours of the third day, Carthaginian troops were ordered to array for battle. Some 15,000 infantry and 1,500 cavalry took to the field. The Roman numbers are quoted as high as 22,000 infantry, but due to sickness and heavy losses while fighting the Sardinians during the previous year, it is likely that their effective strength was closer to 16,000 infantry and 1,200 horse. The exact deployment on the day remains vague, but it is thought that Hasdrubal formed a strong center, flanked by the Sardinians and cavalry on the wings, along with several elephants. Titus mirrored this, placing his veteran and most rested troops in the center, flanked by the less experienced men that recently arrived from Rome, and those barely fit for battle, with cavalry on the wings. Once the deployment was complete, Hasdrubal gave the order to attack. He took position in the center left, while two other commanders by the names of Mago and Hanno led the cavalry contingents on each wing. Hampsicora commanded the Sardinians on the right, while his son Hyostus took position with his countrymen on the left. The deliberate slow advance served to intimidate the Romans, and Titus made sure to steady the men before the first blows were exchanged. The fighting in the center had been the fiercest, but neither side could get an advantage early on. Hasdrubal predicted this and had ordered Mago and Hanno to drive the enemy cavalry from the field and encircle Titus's center. The Roman cavalry, although slightly outnumbered, held the Numidians at bay. But it was the weary Roman infantry flanking Titus's center that took the brunt of the fighting. Unable to hold, they were gradually ground down and pushed back. The decisive moment, however, came when the Roman detachment facing the Sardinians on the right managed to drive them back after Hyostus fell fighting in the front ranks. When his troops learned of his death, the entire Sardinian contingent on the Carthaginian left broke and fled.
You would have thought it'd be the opposite effect.
Much of the Roman foot...
I mean, in the middle, I have to scratch my back.
...could not be restrained and gave chase. They gave no quarter to the fleeing Sardinians and took no prisoners. Crucially, Titus did manage to rally the cavalry on the right and have them wheel inward to attack the Carthaginian center. Hasdrubal and his men stood their ground, but as the Romans enveloped their position, they were gradually cut down to a man. Roman casualties are unknown, but given the overall state of Titus's army and the high attrition during the grueling campaign in Sardinia, losses were likely in the thousands. For the Carthaginian host, the defeat was catastrophic.
Whoa.
Hasdrubal the Bald, along with his lieutenants Mago and Hanno, were captured. Hyostus was killed in the fighting, and his father Hampsicora fled the field. 12,000 fell in battle, while another 1,500 were taken prisoner. Some 3,000 men did manage to escape and head for the coast, where they boarded the waiting ships and promptly sailed for Carthage. But they wouldn't get far before they accidentally ran into a Sicilian contingent of the Roman fleet returning from a raiding mission in Africa. Against 60 Carthaginian warships, the Roman fleet of 100 quinquerenes had a clear advantage. Commanded by Titus or Catulus Crassus, they managed to capture 7 Carthaginian ships, while the rest scattered and made for Africa. In the aftermath of the battle, Hampsicora retreated to Cornus along with the scattered remains of the Sardinian army. But upon learning of his son's fate, he ended his own life. The Sardinian revolt had been defeated. Rebel cities surrendered to Rome, which allowed for some of the troops to return to Italy. The grain supply could resume uninterrupted, an important factor given the damage done to Roman agriculture in Italy.
How is Sicily the last one of the, Corsica, Sicily? Oh my God, I'm blanking on the other name. Sardinia? Yeah, finally, they seem so stubborn over these videos, and finally these two are captured, and now Sicily.
Crucially, the victory at Caralis denied the Carthaginians bases on Sardinia, from where Italy would have been in striking distance. It would be another 5 years before Carthage would threaten Roman domination in Sardinia. Back in Campania, Fabius harassed the holdings of the Carthaginians and their allies, fouling the fields around Capua. But Hannibal made sure the garrisons were well provisioned and could withstand the pressure until his return from Apulia. In addition, fast-moving Capuan irregular cavalry countered the Romans, in turn disrupting their supply lines, killing off patrols, and setting ambushes for the marching armies. Fabius, unwilling to risk being bogged down in enemy territory, retreated to his winter quarters at Suessula. To the south, 4,000 Numidian horse and 40 elephants reached Locri, where they were received by Hanno the Elder. Compared to the number of troops Hannibal was promised, this was a token force, and these would be the only reinforcements that Carthage sent to Italy via the sea throughout the war. With his numbers raised to around 23,000, Hanno the Elder marched west to besiege the vital city of Rhegium, one of the last Roman holdouts in Bruttium. For over a month, Hanno besieged the city, but was unable to fully prevent it from being supplied by sea. 2 major attacks were mounted on the walls, both repulsed. Then a message arrived from the Bruttians asking for aid in taking the city of Croton. Hanno lifted the siege and hurried east. Campaigning season was coming to an end, and while Rhegium was a valuable target, Croton was also of great importance, its fortress dominating the surrounding region. The Bruttians had managed to breach the walls, but were unable to take the citadel. Shortly after Hanno's arrival...
What's the distance there? What is it? Uh, 100 miles. Okay. I expected it to be less for some reason.
The citadel was taken. The Carthaginians could now direct all of their efforts in Bruttium at Rhegium, the last city in the region still loyal to Rome. Hannibal, meanwhile, was settling in for the winter at Arpi. By now it became clear that his greatest weakness was the poor performance of Carthage's generals in other theaters and the lack of support for the war in Italy from the Carthaginian Senate.
Hannibal is carrying on his back.
With the Romans refusing to risk fighting decisive battles, instead opting for a war of attrition, Hannibal was becoming increasingly desperate for more troops, without which he would not be able to match the Romans for much longer. But there was some good news for Hannibal in the winter of 215. Another delegation from Philip of Macedon disembarked and met up with Hannibal at Arpi. They
Don't let me
the
get
Carthaginian
captured.
General that the
Don't let me get captured again, please.
previous embassy was intercepted and imprisoned, and that the terms of the first agreement were lost. The second...
It is so. This is why I say, okay, more so than the wheel. All right, the wheel I don't think is the biggest invention of all time. I don't think that, maybe I guess like agriculture, but that's not an invention. That's like a whole thing. The internet, but instant communication. What is it? The telegraph or whatever, like the Morse, the beep 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 beep. Whenever the first instant communication happened, that must have changed warfare more than gunpowder changed warfare. Like and it's so alien, learning back in time and how it's like, yeah, that never happened. And you have to think like, oh yeah, like think about how much more complicated that makes everything in warfare, like insanely more complicated, as in not knowing in real time what's going on in other parts of your armies or whatever. So crazy.
Second agreement was drafted, and the delegates set off for Macedon once again, this time successfully avoiding Roman naval patrols. Philip's armies would be joining the war next year. Hannibal also received an embassy from Syracuse,
from the Isle of Man.
The pro-Carthaginian faction, riled up by its leaders Hippocrates.
Sorry, where was that? And I forget what the pink is. And I know in the end, I mean, Rome doesn't fail,
next
but
year.
I'm sure
Hannibal also received an embassy from Syracuse. The pro-Carthaginian faction, riled up by its leaders Hippocrates and Epicides, who came to the island last winter, had convinced the young king Hieronymus to fully commit to Hannibal's cause, on the promise of being given full control of Sicily after the war. Hieronymus's army could now push west to expel the Romans from the island, and the Syracusan fleet could contest the seas around the Strait of Messina. This forced Rome to divert invaluable resources to Sicily to ensure they maintained a foothold on the island. The turning of Sicily into a full-blown theatre of war relieved some pressure on Hannibal and bolstered his position in Italy, so much so that the Roman Senate had already begun plans to transfer none other than Marcellus to the island next year, which will strip Italy of the only Roman general who was thus far successful in stopping Hannibal in battle. Despite receiving little help from...
It seems like Hannibal is the, and this is just me, I could be wrong. It seems like the best player on either team is on the Carthage team, Hannibal, but the roster of the Roman team generals is just more stacked, I guess. Does that make sense? It's like LeBron on the Cavaliers versus, you know, whoever.
From Carthage, Hannibal would use the events in Sicily and Macedon to attempt...
Me basically trying to say it seems like the Roman generals overall are much better, but Hannibal seems to be even above them. I could have just said that.
From Carthage, Hannibal would use the events in Sicily and Macedon to attempt to maintain the initiative in 214 BC. If you stayed around this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment as a sacrifice to the algorithm.
Oh, true.
You can also support us on Patreon and get ad-free early access to our videos for as little as $1, or by clicking the thanks button below to leave a one-time tip. As always, we'll see you in the next one.
So this is my sacrifice to the algorithm gods. Okay, great video, guys. I want to get right into, I'm going to try and do at least one, maybe two of the Kings and Generals Russia-Ukraine war. So I'm going to get into that. Awesome video. Thanks, LightX7. And if you guys could answer any of the questions I might have had, we'd love to see it. See you guys next time. Bye, guys.